Hey there, and welcome to the Hatchet Project. Today's episode is going to focus on a comparison between the novel Hatchet to what I'll actually encounter during the experiment portion of this docuseries. So let's start with Hatchet, just to refresh your memory if you haven't read it for a while, or you've just never heard it, or didn't read it. Hatchet's a Newbery Honor book written by Gary Paulson in 1987. It's the story of a 13-year-old boy named Brian who's going to visit his dad for the summer in the middle of nowhere, Canada. His parents recently got divorced, and he's pretty salty about it. He doesn't talk to his mom at all during this 2-hour drive to an outskirts airport in New York, other than giving her a little bit of a smile when she gives him a going-away present, this little hatchet. So they get to the airport, and this lumberjack of a pilot is packing the bush plane, and he gets in, and so it's just him and this pilot. They're flying over the middle of nowhere, Canada. It's just trees and lakes. Finally, the pilot breaks some silence and gives him a little bit of a flying lesson, about 15 minutes, nothing special. The pilot, that is, starts passing gas and kind of feeling a little uncomfortable and everything. He's just passes it off as indigestion. He ate something bad. Turns out he's having a heart attack, and he dies while they're in midair. Brian, other than his 15 minutes of flying, has no idea what to do. It doesn't really hit him that the pilot's dead until a little bit later. He's not really sure whether he should try and land the plane or keep flying. The radio's not working. He got like a second of interaction with someone before it cut out. So he decides the best thing to do is to keep flying the plane. So he flies it until it runs out of gas and slowly coasts it down into a lake where it crashes and sinks. You would think he would die during this, but he doesn't. He's thrust out the windshield and makes his way back up to the surface as the plane sinks to the bed, and makes his way to the shore, where he stays passed out and sore because he can't move for a couple of days. After that, he finds a way to make shelter, fire, tools for hunting and fishing, all just because he has a hatchet. So he's there for 2 months on the shore of this lake. 2 whole months just surviving, this 13-year-old boy. Pretty much giving up hope that anyone's going to find him. And he remarkably is able to do this. It's kind of preposterous. That's one of the reasons why I decided to do this project, because of how, remarkable it is. So he doesn't really come into contact with very many animals, just a pass-by with a bear and a wolf. He gets pricked by a porcupine and sprayed by a skunk, and then at the end of his 2 months, he has a really, really bad day. He runs into this moose who just does not like him and mauls him, thrusting him into the water, trying to drown him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. So this moose just hates this kid. He's finally able to get out of the water and away from the moose and back to camp, and just pretty much exhausted, in pain, pretty sure he broke a rib or 2, maybe 3. So he falls asleep for the night, but wakes up in the middle of the night to screeching wind sounds, because there's a tornado running through the middle of his camp. I don't know if tornadoes are a thing in Canada, but so he holds on for dear life while this tornado rips through his camp and then out into the lake, eventually falling back to sleep. After that, he wakes up in the morning super sore, worse than when he crash landed, and he notices something different about the lake. The tail of the plane is now sticking up, and it doesn't really hit him at first, but then he remembers the pilot packing the plane with a survival kit. So he fashions together a raft and is able to get out there and starts cutting into the plane with his hatchet, soft metal, so it cuts off like an aluminum can, basically. Partway through, he is just so excited and doesn't realize it, but drops his hatchet and it sinks to the bottom of the lake. Luckily, the lake's only like 10 feet deep, so he is able to dive down after a couple attempts and get the hatchet back and then continue ripping into the plane. So he gets in and dives down to find the bag, completely forgetting about the dead pilot that's still in the plane, or what's left of him from the fish eating on him. Yum. So that kind of freaks him out. He scurries back to the surface and regains himself. Goes back down to able to find the bag and kind of dislodge it, but not able to get it up. Goes back down and is able to get it up on that third attempt. So after some finagling, he's able to get the bag out of the plane onto his raft and then gets back. So when he's back at camp, he's going through the bag, finds a sleeping bag, first aid kit, freeze-dried food, a transmitter, which he turns on, thinks doesn't work, that it's been in the water too long or whatever, and various other stuff. So he's looking at all this food and he's like, oh my gosh, I have a feast. So he's prepping all this cool stuff, and a couple hours later, he hears a sound and not really sure what it is. Goes outside to check it out, and it's a plane, lo and behold, and it just lands right on the water, comes up, and pilot's like, hey, you're that kid. And he's like, oh my god, somebody's here to save me, and is like, do you want some food? So he's more excited about the food than being saved. It's kind of funny. Anyways, he goes on, lives happily ever after, whatever. But yeah. Now that you're up to speed on the book and inspiration behind this project, let's get down to the list of differences, since it's no longer 1987 and a lot's changed in aviation location and survival tools and tactics. So as you'll notice, I am not a 13-year-old boy. I am a 23-year-old girl, and my survival knowledge comes from a bit more than just TV and movies, which, if you've read the book, you know that's pretty much where Brian got his knowledge. I am not going to be crashing a plane, as it is very expensive and quite reckless. Since this is a project based around survival and not how to crash a plane or a boat or anything. I also will not be in the middle of Canada, but on the Alaska Pacific coastline, which is a similar environment, but also very different. So there's going to be a lot of different obstacles to deal with. So with Hatchet as a starting point for how someone can go missing, let's think about some of the other ways that especially when it comes to Alaska, someone can go missing. Since a staggering average of 500 to 1,000 people go missing every year, that's about 4 in every 1,000 people out of a population around 7,500,000. The crazy part is that most of these people go missing in a mysterious area known as the Alaskan Triangle. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle, but in Alaska, and covers a lot more land. It actually covers a majority of the state in a triangle from Barrow to Anchorage down to Juneau. But since we're on the topic of airplanes already, let's start with that. Now, planes go down for any number of reasons. Bad weather, icing, coming apart, spontaneous combustion, pilot error, pilot death, coming apart. You've seen the movies, you've heard the news, you know many different reasons. I mean, for all we know, aliens. That's what they think happened to a missing plane from the 1950s, and even people think that about the Malaysian aircraft that went missing a few years ago. Lots of different reasons it happens. So, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, their database, there's been over 9,000 reported plane accidents in Alaska since 1962. 40 of those are still missing. 40 planes since 1962 still missing, not found, all in this mysterious area. Very vast, very different environments, just disappeared. One of these is probably the most famous. You may or may not have heard of it. It was a plane that went down somewhere between Anchorage and Juneau. It was carrying two U.S. congressmen, Nick Begich and Hale Boggs. It went down in 1972. The following year, the U.S. government put out a law requiring all civil aircraft to have a emergency location transmitter on board, ELT. And it's helped tremendously in finding crashed airplanes, but there's still errors in that, and Alaska still ranks at the top of aircraft accidents for the nation. In a study surveying from 1990 to 2015, Alaska made up 36% of commuter and air taxi accidents and 21% of the fatal air events. I keep bringing up ELTs, so let's talk about those a little bit more. If you're on a civil aircraft, there's a 100% chance that there's going to be one on board, but what exactly does that mean? An ELT is designed to transmit a signal for an airplane in distress upon activation. Originally, they transmitted to the International Distress Frequency, but as of 2009, they broadcast to a satellite system, which has cut down on false signals. They can be manually or automatically activated. To be automatically activated, they have to physically fall from their bracket. This is a impact monitor system. Otherwise, they have to be manually turned on, like Brian did in the Hatchet, by a survivor of the crash. So if the crash doesn't dislodge the device and no one survives to turn it on, there's a less likely chance that that plane's going to be found, especially if it veers off course, much like Brian's did. Another common reason for people to go missing in especially Southeast Alaska, where I'll be doing my experiment, is in boating accidents. In the U.S. Coast Guard's most recent recreational boating statistics released for the years 2012 to 2016, Alaska had an average of 22 accidents a year. Of those, an average of 10.6 were fatal, and of those, there was an average of 13.8 deaths each year. Common reasons for boating accidents in Alaska, again, like planes, are bad weather and engine trouble, as well as drunk driving, operator error, running aground into rocks or buoys, and numerous other things. A good, however, bad at the same time example, since it happened to a friend of mine, their boat got caught in some bad weather and ended up going down. My friend was able to make it into a floating fishing net tote and surfed it out for a day or two until a boat passing by was able to pick him up. The event actually made it onto Coast Guard Alaska, but it was a traumatic event, not only for him, but for his friends and family. I know I was states away, panicking because I didn't know if my friend was alive or not. But thankfully, he made a full recovery and is still the same spunky, energetic guy he's always been. Like aircrafts, they make transmitters for marine usage as well. They are called Emergency Position Indicator Radio Beacons, otherwise known as EPIRBs. So like their counterparts, EPIRBs are either manually or automatically activated. To be manually activated, it has to first be physically removed from its bracket and switched on, much like the aircraft version. But for the automatic version of activating it, it has to have enough water pressure to cause a hydrostatic release unit to separate the EPIRB from the bracket. If it doesn't separate from that magnetic bracket, though, it won't activate. However, unlike the ELTs, EPIRBs are only required on vessels that are going to be traveling 3 or more miles offshore. So most boats don't have them. And if your boat goes down and you don't have enough time to make a mayday call, you could be stranded at sea or on a nearby island for who knows how long. But there's a common practice in place that boaters will notify someone of where they're going, about how long they're going to be gone, when they're expected to return, which does help during searches. You can also file with your local Coast Guard a travel report. Another reason someone might go missing is by going out for a hike or a hunt and getting turned around. I'm sure most of you know the true story of Chris McCandless. It was turned into a novel as well as a popular movie, both titled Into the Wild. McCandless, after graduating from college, decided to, without a word, go into the Alaska wilderness and find himself. He ended up injuring himself, unable to provide food to stay alive, and died of starvation. He wasn't found until quite some time after passing, which was quite lucky because lots of people go missing and not very many of them are found in time, if at all. So it was pretty lucky that they actually found his body. But that's why they make these things called personal locator beacons, which are very much like ELTs and EPIRBs, but only smaller and easier to carry for backpackers and hunters and whatnot. So if something does go wrong, you just activate that little device and boop, it goes into that transmitting frequent satellite system, and they're able to locate you. But apart from getting lost, there is other dangers, such as wildlife. As I pointed out when we were talking about the novel earlier, Brian got mauled by a moose. I don't have any moose in the area where the experiment will be happening, but he also had a passing by with a bear and a wolf. Bear are very common in Southeast Alaska, especially during the time of year that I'm going to be doing this experiment. So sometimes you'll encounter different animals and they'll just go on their way and mind their own business, and sometimes they don't. Personally, I've had quite a few close encounters with bear. I've almost walked into them. I've ridden my four-wheeler or ATV right next to them without knowing they're there, and it's quite terrifying, but they usually just go and mind their own business and I go on my way and it's all good. But I do know people who've been out riding and a bear will just come out of the woods and start chasing after them. And we've all heard the stories of people who've gotten eaten. And so there's a lot of different crazy encounters that could happen, and a lot of threats to keep in mind. In each of these various situations in which someone may become tasked with survival, the materials at hand would vary tremendously due to how exactly you come to be in your situation. If your boat goes down, you'll probably only have what's on your person and whatever happens to float ashore, if anything. If your plane crashes, it depends on how and where it lands, much like Brian, to know exactly what's at your disposal. As for a hiker or a hunter, it's whatever you take out to begin with, so you're only as safe as you are prepared. As for my experiment, I wanted to know if it was plausible to survive 2 months with only the tools that Brian had, but with careful consideration, myself and my advisors don't feel that it is safe given the differences in area and time of year of my trip. So I'll be taking along a few more items, but we'll discuss that next week. For now, I've picked up several new books. Prepper's Long-Term Survival Guide by Jim Cobb, and The Wild Truth by Kareen McCandless. It's a family member story of Into the Wild, basically, and the ultimate guide to Army survival skills, tactics, and techniques. But if you have any suggestions of survival material you think I should check out for my preparations, leave a comment below. If you like what I'm doing here, the concept, and find it fascinating, make sure you share this docu-series with your friends and family. And last but not least, thank you for tuning in. I'm Bethany Lawrence, and this is the Hatchet Project.